Let's talk about the architecture of Doom. How do the levels influence us as we're playing? What kinds of worlds are we experiencing when we play? What actually happens or changes when we get different weapons? And most importantly, how did Doom change the way that you see the world? Now, this is not a strategy or a walkthrough or even a history, but a discussion about what architectural thinking can tell us about video games and vice versa. Hi, I'm Scav. Welcome to the Extra Office, a channel where we talk about architecture by talking about the architecture of everything else. Now today, I want to talk about architecture in video games, specifically Doom. Some quick comments to get us started. Doom was launched in 1993 on MS-DOS. It was played by about 15 to 20 million people, making copies and passing it around to one another, and it's a first-person shooter. So right away, we want to talk about who we play as. So we play as Doom Guy, who's a space marine fighting demons through hell. Firstly, the Doom Guy doesn't have a name in the game. The name isn't really given to us. People have actually named Doom Guy because there was no name for the main character. What else is interesting is that we see the face of Doom Guy as it's getting beat up. And I think that allows us to form a sort of empathy for the character. So in this diagram of the two ends of a video game spectrum being the player themselves constructing a hero versus the player becoming a hero. I think those are the two sort of ends of narratives and assuming personalities. And in this game, we're very much becoming the hero. We are becoming Doom Guy. We play as Doom Guy. We get to be Doom Guy. We don't get to be us. That means we sort of form a sort of radical empathy for this character. And that's how we get into it with ourselves. That's how we attach meaning to the actions of the player we control. So let's talk about character movement. What can we access or see? How are we rewarded via access? Well, what's interesting about the levels is that we walk through and you can kind of see where you're going to have to be next or areas that you're going to have to develop or discover, right? We understand as we go through that there are doors, so we know when we will have to come back into a room, and we kind of understand that all these levels are sort of puzzles. What's interesting about the mini-map as an inclusion for me is that what the mini-map really does is provide you with a new way of seeing. Really, you're only able to see this sort of first-person view, right? And when you change the way that you see or visualize your space, suddenly tons of different possibilities open up. And when we access that mini-map, we are suddenly in an entirely new space, and we can see things from an entirely different perspective that allow us to understand where we've been and what we've been doing. I know sometimes I play and then I look at that mini-map and I have no idea where I'm at, right? And so that adjustment of perspective can really help us gather ourselves and form strategy and manipulate the level around us, right? In general, this is not an open world. Really, you're ultimately just kind of patrolling room to room, more like a series than an open world necessarily. So we know who we are, and we're trying to form an empathy with that character, and we know what we can see and do is limited, right? We can only run. We don't have jump. Right? It looks 3D, but it's really a 2D game. And let's talk about the mood and the environment. So the environment is dark and moody and dripping with demonic symbols, and the fonts and the menus even kind of push this even further. They add to the mood of the environment around you. Those are also environments around you, the player. Not just you, the character, but you, the player, right? The actual fonts and menu system allows you, by continuing this sort of hyper aesthetic of demons and hell and blood and gore, those menus even condition you, the player, to understand sort of what you're getting yourself into, right? And those things, the attention to those things kind of keep you in the game. Today, we can see this game as like vividly taking place on a computer because of the way the textures are and the way the geometry is rendered and built. which I think creates a really interesting playthrough today, because it's a really incredible and sort of otherworldly experience to sort of enter a space of early computing, because to be able to go back and to use an old computer is already incredibly difficult, right? The older softwares and the older computers and the software on them is really, really difficult to get to access. But through this game, through Doom, I can be on a Switch, a Nintendo Switch, and I can experience the aesthetics of early computing. And I think that's really important and makes the spaces in Doom architecturally significant. And those gaps, those sort of architectural gaps, are filled with this single picture of the outside world. And I think that makes the drawing of the levels so important. The mini map, or the map of the sort of desert with bunkers scattered throughout that we are exploring. That peak, that single image is telling us about the entire world that we're in, right? And so there is so much importance on that image as it's teaching us and inviting our imagination to sort of think about just where we are on Mars, and how we're getting in between these, and how much more struggle is going on around us, and how epic the whole scenario is, right? And so that just having that peak, I think, is another level of sort of building the narrative and building the world around the player that adds depth and meaning to what you're doing. In the Shores of Hell, the fighting moves from humanoid bases infested with demons to bases infested with demonic architecture, or demonic architectural motifs. And I think this signification of decoration means that the demons have a sense of style and need to create their own space, which is very cool, because it's impossible for us to imagine a home for demons that wouldn't be revolting, pulsating with blood, and held together by sinew. But this makes me wonder, what if a demon wants something different, right? Something bright or clean or more convenient. But this to me is a reflection of how humans sort of need to see demons, right? That's not how demons see themselves, maybe, but how we need to see demons. So we have us, we have the environment. How do we advance that in that environment? Well, we aren't actually fighting monsters. Believe it or not, we're actually fighting for our ability to leave a building. We actually don't change any of our own abilities, but we create the ability to change space by acquiring different weapons. So how does the architecture influence the strategy? Well, knowing that we're fighting space, not monsters, as a player, the most important thing to understand is what weapon we have allows us to move differently through space. In other words, the stronger the weapon, quote unquote, or the more rare the weapon, the less cautious we have to be when moving throughout space, because we can waste anything that gets in our way, right? But the simpler our weapon, the shotgun, the pistol, we have to be much more cautious. The better you are as a player, the better you understand how to change your movements based on what weapon you have access to. And of course, this is all coming from someone who's just playing the game as a normal player. Now, the architecture breaks when we find secrets.
These highly digital secrets were established in nearly joking ways. The infinitely small ledges you could actually stand on, or walking through walls. These do a few things. One, they ruin the mood and remind you that you are in a computer game. They are a sort of fourth wall break. Unlike the chests in other games which exist within the limits of the game as rewards, these were often entirely outside the bounds of the game and kept in highly digital secret spaces. Knowledge that the very walls around you are infinitely thin gives one an advantage. Also, the game actively counted secrets as well as completion time versus a par time as a way of enticing you, as if the game wasn't about the actual way of getting through hell, but the way of playing the levels as a skill. Beating the levels, or the architecture, became the game itself more than the narrative.
And that kind of enticement can be seen today with the kind of playthrough communities and speedrunning. So how did Doom change the way that you see the world? Well, as in any game that you play, you are submitting yourself to enjoy another type of subjectivity. And when we meet somebody that we know and also enjoys that type of subjectivity, that gives meaning to our lives, or that emotional connection with that person feels good. But in specific, Doom, as a way of hacking and grinding your way through tons of monsters, you spend 5 hours doing that, and you leave and look at the world you have and you say, everything looks a little brighter, a little safer, a little happier. And that effect, that conditioning, is the architecture of the game. The architecture is creating that other space, and that other space turns you around to the regular world and says, look how bright and decent this place is. And that's why people like the game. And in this way, the death metal soundtrack is certainly no accident. That is also another type of subjectivity, or at least culture or community, where people have a kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of head nod, like, yeah, I enjoy that too, right? And in that same way that this game, that Doom helps you build that with other people, build that connection. And I think the immersive qualities of Doom, between the fonts and the menus and the sort of hints at multiple games, and they start to connect the values of the game itself with other types of value systems that people who enjoy that subjectivity might have, which is why I think the game was so successful, and the ability of that environment, or the architecture of the environment, to infect the mind of you, the player. Thanks for listening. Of course, like, share, and subscribe to get more videos like this. Comment below what game you think I should do next, and feel free to join me and Extra Office on Patreon to get a shout out in the next video, and join a Discord chat and add your voice to this discussion.